We're going to demonstrate how to refinish leather. This particular piece was brought into us by a customer. A lot of worn areas, faded areas, the finish is wearing off. It also had a panel that needed to be replaced. It was damaged beyond repair. So he took it to an upholstery shop. They didn't have the same color for the seat, so they put something close in, and so we're going to make this the same color. So actually what we're doing here, we're doing two things. We're refinishing the leather. We're also making a color change to this leather. So we're going to go through the entire process, and the very first thing that we need to do is clean this leather. I'm going to use some paper towel. You can use any kind of cleaning material that you'd like, microfiber towels, soft terry cloth, whatever. It's not important. But I'm going to soak this leather up really well with the leather cleaner, and then we're going to scrub it down. Now what this leather cleaner is going to do is remove any foreign matter that may be on the leather. Dirt, grime, body oils, that sort of thing. We have no idea what this leather has been exposed to over time, so we need to get as much off of it as we possibly can. So the first cleaning step is going to remove a lot of that material. We also want to make sure to get down into the seam areas. Get any loose debris that may be down in there, get it out. And we'll just continue cleaning. Now I want to pay a little closer attention to here. This is new leather. It hasn't been exposed to anything. It's going to require a little bit more attention than the original leather. The reason being, because it's new leather, the finish is softer, a little bit more difficult to work with because it is so soft. It has never been exposed to anything, got the hardening effect of the sun and other things. We also don't know what it's been exposed to. During the manufacturing process, leather is exposed to a lot of lubricants, silicones, and other chemicals that would cause problems with adhesion of our new materials. So we need to make certain that we get all of that off. And there is our cleaning process. We're working in direct sunlight, so this is going to dry really quickly. But you want to wait and make sure that it's completely dry before you go to the next step. This is already dry now. We're going to go ahead and start. So the next step in the process, we're going to use some sandpaper. This is a special sandpaper. It's a 220 grit coated sandpaper. It's designed for this type of work. And we're just going to lightly scuff the surface. Don't want to sand it too much. I don't want to take the finish completely off. I certainly don't want to sand it to where it becomes suede. We just want to scuff the surface. And what that scuffing is doing is breaking that surface so that anything that we put on from this point will be more readily and more deeply absorbed into the leather. Causes a very, very permanent finish. One that's going to last at least as long as the original and probably longer. I want to be careful with the emblem. I don't want to scratch it, but it's loose enough I can get my sandpaper down underneath it. as you can see, it's just a light sanding. We're just breaking the finish. I'll take my sandpaper, I will fold it, and I'll get down in to the seam areas, because this is going to be the weakest part of the seat as far as finish is concerned. If we do not do our prep work properly, this will be the first place it lets go. So we want to make sure that we get that sanded well, get that prepped properly. Now on the new part of the leather, it will sand, but it's going to be a bit more difficult to sand because the finish is so much softer. You will feel a great deal more drag on the sandpaper as you're going over it. That's not a problem. You're going to basically just do the same thing, look for the same results. Because even though it's a little bit tougher to do, you're still accomplishing the same thing. And that's what's involved as far as the second step of the process, the sanding. Now we move on. The next step, we want to use our leather prep. Leather prep does far more than the leather cleaner will do. It will remove the contaminants that we spoke about that the leather cleaner could not remove. So it's much stronger in that sense. But more importantly, it's going to do some other things. I'm going to use this chemical very liberally. And I want to soak that leather up very well. Because what the leather prep is going to do is open up the pores of that leather so that anything that we put on top of it now will again be more immediately absorbed and more deeply absorbed. Because what our accomplishment is, we're trying to get this to be an absolutely permanent finish. And by doing the prep work properly, that's exactly what you will get. Again, I'm focusing on the seam areas, washing down the area really well. You can see I'm taking some of the color off. That's a good thing. It lets you know that the chemical's doing its job, doing what it's supposed to do. Now, leather prep will not hurt emblems such as this. Will not hurt metal, will not hurt the hard plastics. At worst, it may make it a little cloudy looking, but that's easily remedied by using a little bit of conditioner on it afterwards. And that is our prep work. Now it's important that everything be dry before we move on to the actual application of the color. So I'm going to stop the video here. We're going to give this about 5, maybe 10 minutes to dry, and we'll move on. You can use a hair dryer to speed up drying time. We're in the direct sun here, so the sun's going to do the job for us. But we just want to make certain that it's dry before we proceed. Now we're going to proceed with putting our first coat of color on. We have a pre-mixed color here that's mixed to match the original. We want to shake this up extremely well. And we're going to use a sponge. This is a very dense foam sponge. It does an excellent job at spreading the material. And all I'm going to do is put a nice light thin coat on the leather. I want to keep it very light and thin. And this little bit of pressure from the sponge is going to help force that material deep into the leather. That little bit of pressure just pushes it down to where we get a very solid base for the rest of our coats. And that's exactly what we want. We want that material as deep into the leather as we can get it. It doesn't take a great deal of pressure. But that wiping action really helps in creating a permanent job. Now, I'm not trying to cover this all up in one coat. I still see some of the discoloration through it. That's exactly what I want, because I want to keep this material very light and thin. If we load it up, if the material were any thicker, it would actually tend to fill in the grain pattern of the leather. And that will cause it to take on a fake, painted, artificial look. Definitely something we don't want to have happen. So keeping it very light and thin, using a thin viscosity material, you will not get that effect. Now I'm going to work to keep it off of that emblem. If we did happen to get a little bit on that emblem, it's easy enough to get off. We can use a little bit of leather prep. Once the material's dry, and it will take it right off. This material, once it's dry, you can put the unit back into service immediately. However, it does require between 12 and 24 hours of cure time. That will allow it to reach its total strength capabilities. So during that first period, if you put the unit back into service, just be careful not to drag anything heavily across it, spill anything onto it. Just exercise a little bit of care with it. After 24 hours, it will be just as tough as the original finish. Also on this perforated area, I don't want to put too much of the color coat on. I don't want to fill the holes. So we keep it very light on these areas too. That way the holes stay intact, they do not get filled, and they look the way they're supposed to. Now in this area, you definitely are not going to see a great deal of change at this point because the material is going on so thin. It's going to take a bit more material to cover this than it does to cover that. And that is our first color, excuse me, our first coat of color. We'll let that dry and we'll come back and we'll finish up the final coats. Now I have masked off everything that I don't want to get leather dye on, so that now we have just a nice area to work with. Don't have to worry about getting overspray. We're going to continue with the application of our color at this point. Now I'm going to let you know you have 4 options. You can continue wiping it on with the sponge. That's not a problem. The only problem with a sponge, it takes a lot more coats because you're putting it on so very thin. You also have the possibility of getting stroke marks on the finish, which is not acceptable. But if you're really careful and it's the only way you want to do it, you can be very successful at it. The other option is the use of a Preval sprayer. This is a pressurized unit. It attaches to the bottle of color coat, works just like an aerosol, does not require any external tooling. It works on its own. Does a very nice job. Only problem with these, they can be sometimes rather temperamental. Your third option, a little airbrush. This airbrush is rather inexpensive. You can buy them off of Amazon. A lot of the tool companies will have them. They do an excellent job. They're very fast. They put an excellent finish on the leather. The big drawback, they require an air compressor. Most people don't have one, so we'll revert back to the Preval sprayer. The last option, and if you're doing a very big job, the use of an HVLP touch-up gun is very beneficial. On a small job like this, it's not necessary. If you're doing an entire interior, for instance, or maybe a large sofa, it comes in handy. Does a tremendous job, puts on a nice spray pattern, works really well. Again, the drawback, it does require an air compressor. So because most people do not have access to an air compressor, we're going to focus on the use of the Preval sprayer. Now, all you do is just attach it to the bottle. Put the tube onto it before you put it in. Make sure that your color coat is shaken extremely well. These are highly pigmented and the pigments will settle to the bottom, so you need to keep it shaken up. There are instructions on how to use this. We've also got some videos on how to use the Preval sprayer. I won't go into all of that at this point. But what we want to do with the Preval, I want to hold it back about 12-14 inches. And I want to start my spray and just a light, thin mist. Nothing heavy. Keep the coat very even. Keep the sprayer moving as you press the button. You'll notice I'm getting a very nice, even spray. Nothing heavy. I do not want to put it on heavy. Again, going back to what was said earlier, if you put the material on heavy, you can fill in the grain pattern of the leather, cause it to look fake, painted looking, unacceptable. This method is going to keep the grain pattern visible, keep the leather looking natural. You can let this dry on its own. You can also use a hair dryer. A hair dryer in this situation is very beneficial because you can quickly dry the color coat and proceed on to the next. You have to have these completely dry before you go to the second coat. And as you can see, we're already getting our light red color pretty much gone. We will need to put another coat on, at least one more coat. I will probably put 2 more coats on here, simply because it's a bit more difficult to color. So we'll let this dry and we'll come on back and do the next coat. Okay, our first coat of spray is completely dry. We're going to do a second coat, and it is going to be done in exactly the same way. A nice, light, thin coat. Get it even coverage. Everything covered well. Like I said, went nice, light, thin coats. Don't overload it. One of the worst things that can happen to you is if you get it too heavy, it can run, in which case this material is very forgiving, so you can kind of dab out a little bit of a run with your finger if necessary. Now in this case, I'm going to use the hair dryer because I want to dry it quickly. With the hair dryer, it'll dry in just a couple of minutes. And that's dry. My final coat. I'm going to hold my sprayer back just a little farther this time because I want to get a much lighter spray. And one more time with the hair dryer. And that's our finished product. Everything is the same color. Everything's where it's supposed to be. Even our light red leather is now the same color as the rest of it. This is a permanent finish. It will last at least as long and probably longer than the original finish. And thank you for watching the video.